Thought cannot function independent of the body. It has parasitized the human organism and has now become the master. By Yogi Krishnamurti. Hello everyone, this is your host Baby Flower. I'm the best-selling author of the series All Kaal None and my standalone novel Yama, Echo, Maya. You can borrow them from Amazon Kindle Unlimited on a device of your choosing or buy my ebook from Amazon. Or you can even order the paperback if you love to read with a book in your hand. Today's topic for discussion is connection. There are people who loathe the perils of modern, constant, connected ways to express and communicate. Although sometimes it's asynchronous and not a direct one-on-one connection, which perhaps is the case always, especially if you are dumping your opinion on social media, people never listen. Everyone is out there to express their point of view. But anyway, being nostalgic would only compare to a landmark that is also coming from knowledge. Any reaction is from knowledge. Today's online connection or in-person connection of the past, it is all from the knowledge bank. Let's talk about phone. Phone has become such a great tool for connecting. Recently, my daughter and I were traveling to India and my husband was monitoring us on an app. And now he can see my daughter placed 7,500 miles away from him. Now, even though we are using technology to our advantage for all the work-related aspects and personal linking, but when anything adverse happens, we blame that very technology. We go back to the point of Industrial Revolution even and say that it was that era that expedited loss of nature. Heck, even I said that in my book. But just maybe exponential growth happens with knowledge related applications in a natural way. You know, it was perhaps not possible without the interference of exploitation of knowledge. One of my husband's friends was blaming Graham Bell for inventing the telephone. Or maybe perhaps it was some other invention that started this rampant pace of destruction of nature by connecting people globally. But then again, how far behind can you go and scrutinize it? I mean, it won't solve anything. Moreover, we are already in a virtual world. Right now, when you are listening to me, it's just your own action to retrieve some saved data, image, sound, etc. from YouTube and make sense of it. There is the user interface, speech, vision, etc. And you are the user. Yuji had said, body doesn't know, eye doesn't know, the sensors don't care. They just relate to some knowledge system to act. Now, when I think of what he had said, what Yuji had said, this is what happens with pets and kids perhaps, they are trained apparently by positive reinforcement. It is similar to drug addiction, if you ask me, administering small dosage to make it an addiction and second nature slowly. Sensual movement, sort of. Sensors pass information. Knowledge bank says, yes, I like it. Give me more. Or it responds by saying, I don't like it, or that I don't know this. And it stores new experience for future response. I digressed a little, but point is, whatever we are trying to call communication by connection is actually just an expression. It means nothing. The real processing or magic, if you want to see that way, happens in this faux entity called me. And it might perhaps not even be a part of the body, as this me is nothing but an idea or bunch of ideas, that which cooks up an entire story for continuity, for its own continuity. The moment I pick up the phone and talk to someone, it's not really me talking in reality. It's data mapping and replaying on both ends. Because I was on phone with my husband and I wanted to talk to my cat, Jon Snow. You know, he misses me terribly. He's depressed and he's just, sitting in a box, feeling all sad and lonely. But when I was screaming on top of my lungs on phone, I said, John, John. And John just didn't even respond. He just walked away. So perhaps that is why cats are not falling for that, because it is not me. The digitally transmitted voice does not appeal to animals. They can differentiate. But what we call vibes or wave communication, like in my series All Kaal None, or even in Yama, I have honed on that concept. They are sensor-based responses still. I have mentioned it as interpretation of hormone signals and feelings. So with the digital connection, it is data taking over, where sensor can communicate anything and processor will make sense of it and replay it. There are many experimental videos that show how mind can play tricks on us. It was actually pretty creepy. When you are looking at something, it is called power of auto suggestion or something like that. So the image or word for that image are understood as one and the same. The capturing and translation is built by this entity, the faux entity, me, that I talked about. There are many such things I saw where, there was this paragraph where they had bolded a few letters in a word, and the rest of it was almost invisible, but I could read it perfectly well. So sensors doesn't mean anything. This processor or thought can map it to what would make sense to us. Like Yuji said, thought can make it happen. So, which means all that is needed is to think for us. And so it occurred to me, all the so-called communication we are having is as good as being plugged in the matrix. Soon it would evolve to where we don't need to use physical travel to be connected. You should read my book Yama for a glimpse at such a virtual possibility world, because that's what I have displayed in there. It's a hybrid situation there. So now this mapping of whatever to something tangible is happening at virtual level with replication. And so interpreter is the key. Who is the user, who is playing back and reconstructing, or thinks it's reconstructing. We take physical reliability for that, but thought has the final word on it. Now I want to read an excerpt from my book Yama Echo Maya. Here there's a concept called words, and these are humans that have chosen to be plugged into virtual reality, and they select a lifestyle that they get to live until they die. So this character Xylus is telling another character, Minfora. Xylus says, memory right is always by thought. Senses didn't capture anything and were used as an input channel to stream the world mind. Minfora says, how the fuck are we any different from the words? So Xylus says, you aren't. So in this excerpt, I have theorized that we are already virtual. We just don't realize it. So back to thought writing experiences. I'm not talking about interpretation or lost in translation or different meanings. It just means the data is played by a system called me, and it plays exactly the same all the time. even when the input is a little off, as I gave an example of the bolded letters in words, and I was still able to play it back exactly the same. Let's take it one step further. It is not hard to see we are only talking all the time, always expressing. Yuji had said, "How can you listen?" And think about it. Yes, how can you listen as your body is incapable of listening? What we call listening is not listening at all. Sounds or sound waves land on sensors, and thought takes over by playing it like a movie. And I don't know if there is anything outside that movie. The movie is the reality for me and you. Now, the point is, Graham Bell, when he invented the telephone, just added layers and kind of broke the barriers of space and time. He moved some parts of these data between this faux me entities, but the essence never changed. We were corrupted by thought long before. So when we complain about all this internet, too much data, too much screen time, etc., of course there is more layering and more data inputs to our sensors because of this, but it is the mind's fertile imagination that plays the recorder and watches the movie all the time. Or this faux me that plays the recollection for its continuity, expressing nonstop. Therefore, two people don't talk. But in fact, it's like monkeys dancing. Now, don't go shooting the messenger, the technology, when it's the entity me that is playing tricks and trying to blame the technology. Our inner conflicts are fed from knowledge. If you were to turn back the clock and the only reference that you have is animals, plants, and inanimate objects like the sun, the moon, soil, and water, there are these Aboriginal tribes that populated Hawaii first by looking at the position of stars, and they would travel during the nighttime due to that reason. But if you go further back, and let's say there was perhaps no separation between the animals, plants, inanimate objects, the sun, the moon, the soil, the water, but then there was no point in connecting, as it is all one. The question arises, what am I trying to achieve when there is no separation? Because then it is blatantly apparent that this faux entity me is trying to solve a problem that doesn't even exist. Let's connect this to our modern world. Word is the key in any given language, speaking, reading, or writing. Constant word identification and story building and linking of thoughts, that's all it is. Someone had commented on one of my podcasts that me is what keeps this going. So the manual kill switch that perhaps we look for when blaming the system or the technology or asking for an end is also unfortunately thought generated. When you realize there is no way to separate yourself from the problem disappears. However, immediately backup system engages and creates this as new subject to ponder on, as in separation as an idea. So this pseudo communication, or the movie play from knowledge bank on sensor driven signals, is the necessary evil if you want to speak in a frustrated common man terms, or even spiritual market terms. Unfortunately, it cannot stop. And why should it? And what for? Perhaps in search of happiness, peace, etc.? The story then continues of faux me with these new ideas then. This thing that expresses and brings the pseudo communication and replay and movie playing, it needs a host, kind of mirror to bounce off. I have this concept in my book, Yama Maya actually, where faux or replicated Maya wants to express itself, and so it needed a host. And this character Akron in my story says, intelligence can't travel, information can. It needs processor to express, hence the need for humans or machines. And yet another character, Xylus, which by the way readers are loving, said the following about this faux Maya. Everything is an illusion, but expression makes it real. So this intelligence was just as real as anything else as it had expressed itself. So in a similar way, or similar to what Silas said, any data and knowledge bank and all the softwares are also expressions coming out of root consciousness. So when Yuji said a thought is your enemy, he also turned around and said that thought is what keeps you alive. But who is this you? Well, it is the faux me entity. And the connection between these ideas and body is what makes it express itself and gives the impression of being alive. Most of our expression comes from communication. This website, Himalayan Academy, says, quest for quietude is an outer search. But to me, silence is that empty space that we observe. It is bombardment of data from our sensors without processing them. It does not mean hearing or feeling anything, but not making sense of it. Kind of like those matrix numbers dropping on the screen with no rhyme or reason or meaning to them, unless you link it with your stored knowledge. Well, thank you for listening. This is your host, BB Flower, signing off. Bye-bye.